Did you know that every year, about 1 to 3 million hectares of the Amazon rainforest are destroyed? To help you picture how much that is, imagine if several major cities were wiped out multiple times over. For example, Tehran is about 73,000 hectares. So, the destruction of 1 to 3 million hectares of the Amazon rainforest each year is like Tehran going up in smoke between 13 to 40 times every year. So just imagine, a forest that produces 20% of the world's oxygen and is known as the lungs of the earth is now extremely vulnerable. This is where a small tribe called the Ashaninka steps in for a rescue mission. But what's even more interesting is that in this tribe, there are people who, contrary to what we usually think about indigenous people, have taken up a kind of modern weapon instead of bows and arrows. That weapon is none other than the internet. You heard that right. They believe that as long as they're connected to the internet, their territory is safe. So how does that work? Today, we're going to dive into this very topic and see how the Ashaninka indigenous tribe, instead of giving in, has managed, with intelligence, technology, and commitment, in a word, with a technological revolution, to create a miracle and save both their culture and the Amazon rainforest. So don't go anywhere until the end of this video, because you're about to hear a bunch of strange and amazing things. The Ashaninka tribe lives on the border between Peru and Brazil, in a region full of dense forests and extremely valuable timber. These people truly have a deep and ancient history, and their historical roots go back centuries before the arrival of the Spanish. They were even present during the period when rubber harvesting was booming in the Amazon. You should know that the historical rubber boom refers to a significant period in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when the Amazon region truly thrived due to the extensive extraction and global trade of natural rubber, a vital commodity. In fact, at that time, people used the sap from Hevea or Brasiliensis trees, which naturally grew in the Amazon forests. The sap from these trees was the primary source for producing this rubber, and they used it to make car tires, various gears, tires, and many other products. Although this period led to rapid development in many parts of the Amazon and a significant increase in its internal population, this boom came at the cost of environmental destruction, exploitation of native workers, and, overall, the terrible exploitation of indigenous communities. As a result, many tribes were forced to leave their lands. Let's go back to the Ashaninka tribe in the late 20th century. That place turned into the scene of a horrific civil war in Peru. You might be wondering why. It was all because of the rise of a guerrilla group called the Shining Path, which in Spanish is known as Sendero Luminoso. The goal of this group was to overthrow the central government of Peru and establish a communist regime in the style of Maoist China, inspired by Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Revolution. In short, this movement, with its harsh and rigid ideology, told people, "You're either with us or you're our enemy." But where did the disaster begin? At first, the guerrilla war with the government took place in the cities, but very soon it spread to remote and rural areas like the Amazon jungle. In the midst of all this, the Ashaninka tribe, who lived on the border of Peru and Brazil, found themselves right in the middle of the battlefield. The guerrilla group wanted to use the tribe's lands, recruit their people, and use them as labor and cover. The government army also suspected whether these tribes were cooperating with the rebels or not. But what was the result? Fire from both sides. This is how about 6,000 people were killed, many of whom were civilians. About 5,000 people were also taken for forced labor, ideological training, or military use, and around 10,000 were displaced and had to leave their ancestral tribes. Some of them barely managed to escape to Brazil, but even there, they weren't entirely safe from illegal loggers and their destructive activities. These loggers were especially after mahogany trees, which are extremely valuable and expensive. Each ton of them can sometimes cost up to 90,000 euros. In short, that period was one of the most tragic cases of genocide and displacement of indigenous people in South America. But things don't always stay the same. Next, you'll see how the Ashaninka tribe learned to defend themselves. Well, for years, the Ashaninka tribe defended their forests and homes with their traditional tools, like bows and arrows. But obviously, bows and arrows weren't much use against the timber traffickers who came with chainsaws and firearms. But then something big happened. In 2001, with the help of a Brazilian NGO called FAIJUA, a strange but amazing idea was put into action. They installed internet in the heart of remote Amazon villages. However, for the indigenous Ashaninka people, the internet wasn't just a simple tool for making videos and going online. It was, in fact, a truly powerful and essential weapon. You might ask how? Well, they started recording videos of illegal loggers who were cutting down mahogany trees. Then they would send these videos with live links to government officials and institutions like the courts. This led to the police and army coming in by helicopter and even arresting the Peruvian loggers while they were working. Later, it was reported that about 12 of the Peruvian loggers were arrested right at the moment they were cutting down the trees. Now, in the midst of all this, two sons of the Ashaninka tribal chief, named Benki Piako and Moises Piako, decided to choose a path in life that would allow them to stay true to their traditions while also becoming familiar with modern science. Benki became a specialist in forestry and sustainable agriculture. He learned how to restore the forest without causing it any harm, and Moises became a shaman. A shaman, in indigenous culture, is someone who serves as a spiritual leader and healer, familiar with medicinal plants and traditional rituals. In short, they built a school called the Ancient Forest School. This school was built right in the middle of the forest itself, and it was meant for local people to learn how to farm without harming the soil, how to replant trees in burned or damaged areas of the forest, how to sustainably harvest and ethically sell native products like the popular acai berry, or even how to produce the traditional spiritual drink known as ayahuasca in a carefully controlled and culturally respectful way. This particular school's significant role wasn't just purely educational anymore. It also became a very important kind of economic and cultural model, primarily because the indigenous people learned how to effectively use their very own resources and not be dependent on the city or factories. Now, the Ashaninka tribe has successfully managed to become self-sufficient because they produce their own food, provide education, create jobs, and have also restored the forest. But the important and remarkable point is that, to this day, more than 3 hectares of forest have been restored. On the other hand, other indigenous groups are also starting to follow this tribe's example. For instance, they come to see what the Ashaninka have done to create a real balance between tradition, nature, and technology. They're implementing similar approaches themselves. You should know that before 2015, most environmental or forestry projects in the Amazon were carried out by government organizations, large NGOs, or companies. But what about the indigenous people? At best, they were consulted, but they weren't the decision makers. But in 2015, a historic event took place. An organization called Amazon Fund, which is one of the major financial supporters of environmental projects and receives its funding from various countries, for the first time directly trusted an indigenous group and allocated $2.2 million to them. This money was used to collaborate with the Ashaninka tribe to develop sustainable forest agriculture projects. And the goal of this project was for the Ashaninka not only to restore their own land, but also to teach the successful model to neighboring tribes. Well, this was considered a major breakthrough, because up until then, no other indigenous group anywhere in Brazil had ever received such an independent financial agreement from a major government institution. Now imagine, a tribe that for years had been under pressure from timber traffickers and settlers had now become a model for sustainable forest agriculture management. But the story didn't end there. In 2016, another member of the Biako family, Isaac Biako, decided to take another big step and run for mayor. The town was called Marichal Thaumaturgo, with a population of about 17,000, mostly non-indigenous people with a long history of land grabbing and exploiting forest resources. But, surprisingly, Isaac Piako actually won the election and became the first indigenous mayor in the entire region. Even more interesting, his performance was so good that he was re-elected in 2020. That means both indigenous and non-indigenous people trusted him, because Isaac was someone who managed to combine the traditional Ashaninka way of thinking with modern politics, through policies focused on protecting natural resources, education, and sustainable development. He managed to transform the area from a center of reckless resource extraction into a hub for conservation and restoration. So, both the direct financial support to the indigenous people and their entry into official urban management mark a major turning point in the story of the Ashaninka tribe's resistance and success. But in recent years, the Ashaninka tribe has seen with their own eyes that climate change is no longer just a global topic at international conferences. It's come right to their doorstep in the middle of the jungle and is suffocating them. Unprecedented drought and heat are wreaking havoc. For example, in the Jaro region, deep in the heart of the western Brazilian forests, the heat and dryness have increased dramatically. On the other hand, the temperature of the Amana River, which is one of the major tributaries in northwest Brazil, in the states of Amazonas and Para, has risen so much that the fish have died because the water's oxygen level has dropped. People can't even bathe in this river anymore because the water temperature has become dangerous for their skin. And when a river that has always been a source of life itself turns into a threat, it means the situation is really dire. On the other hand, during the rainy seasons, unusually heavy downpours have caused unprecedented floods that have submerged and swallowed up the entire region. These floods didn't just destroy homes, they also wiped out the farms. Local and essential crops like yucca, bananas, and corn were completely washed away, and even crucial access roads were severely cut off, effectively isolating the tribes for many weeks. For the Ashaninka tribe, this truly is a major wake-up call, because they've profoundly realized that nature isn't just the forest you protect by not cutting down its trees or preventing devastating fires. Nature is, in fact, a whole intricate and interconnected ecosystem. So, from food, medicine, and shelter to spiritual rituals and the cultural identity of the tribes in this region, it seems like everything is tied to the Amazon rainforest. So if the forest dies, it's not just the trees that die. The entire Ashaninka civilization and even other tribes, or in a broader sense, the whole world, is at risk of destruction. So maybe once again, the Ashaninka tribe needs to take the lead and transform from a community of defenders into a community of activists. And now, by using technology, diplomacy, and traditional knowledge in a scientific and serious way, actively seek solutions to save themselves and the entire ecosystem. Now that we've reached this point, let me talk about the different theories that exist regarding the future of the Amazon rainforest and indigenous peoples like the Ashaninka tribe. Well, my perspective is different. Some people are optimistic and say that with increased global awareness, investment in sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, and genuine participation of indigenous peoples, the Amazon can be saved and a new model of human development created. A model that relies on nature, not one that works against it. On the other hand, there's a group that's pessimistic and says that as long as governments are dependent on the timber, livestock, and mining economies, there's no way to save the Amazon. Because for them, short-term profit is always more important than long-term survival. Meanwhile, some scientists have warned that if the rate of destruction passes a critical threshold, the Amazon rainforest might no longer be able to recover and could instead turn into a dried-up savanna. But personally, I think tribes like the Ashaninka teach us and remind us that the future of technology and the future of nature aren't necessarily in conflict. In fact, when science and tradition listen to each other, they can actually save one another. So for me, the Ashaninka aren't just an indigenous tribe deep in the Amazon. They represent a possible future for us. Because if they can stand tall again after displacement, colonization, war, and climate change, they teach us a lesson in resilience too. So what's our role in all this? The simplest thing we can do is to raise awareness by sharing this video and help amplify the voices of indigenous people to the whole world. What do you suggest? Share your thoughts in the comments. The story of the Ashaninka tribe teaches us that saving the earth starts with those who have always lived in harmony with it. Just as they realize that the forest isn't just nature but life itself, we also need to understand that the Amazon isn't just trees, it's our collective breath. So to save it, we all need to do our part. Let's remember that development without the participation of indigenous communities is just destruction. But the question is, do we also have the courage, like the Ashaninka, to both preserve tradition and embrace technology, and to find a path to salvation out of the darkness? Be sure to think about it.